Okay, I believe we are streaming. We are live.
Awesome. So we're done with our closed session. We are moving on to the next agenda item, although we have a brief announcement from the Finance Committee. So is that correct? That's what we're moving to. Hoyt, do you want to go ahead and give that announcement?
Absolutely. Morning, folks. Again, we're going to let's be as succinct as I can. We're going to present the March financials in our June board meeting that we're going to have scheduled for next month. The Finance Committee met extensively with the school yesterday to review the financials, and what we realized then was that there was still some information to update on a positive perspective, some grants that we wanted to see accounted for to give a fuller picture of the financials at that point in time. And we also, in part of that conversation, we also realized that the school, especially from the business operations kind of administration standpoint, was still feeling the after effects or the effects of all the activity that swirls up around COVID and dealing with COVID and the administrative impacts, business operations impacts. And as a result, we want to be able to support the finance office with more resources so that they can not only complete the things that they have to do that's regularly on the plate, also the things they have to do that are increased activity as a result of COVID, and address. So we want to give them some more support in order to do that, and more help in that back office perspective. So one of the ways that we're going to do that is actually kind of reach out to a third party and help to get some of those some of the basic functions that are usually done by multiple different people in the department, to get those work activities done. And it's going to free up the capacity to include some of the additional grants that we had identified that we think that need to be in there. And once we do that, and that's the goal, that once we do that, and that will need to be done before our June board meeting, we can present those March 22 financials in our June board meeting. And we can also present, we hope to be in the position to present the budget for next school year as well. Okay.
Thank you, Hoyt.
Yep, no worries. Any questions? That's all I have, Heather. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right, Erica. Or no, you're gonna let Julia in. So the next agenda item is the Academic Excellence Committee, and we're going to hear a little bit about how our scholars are doing as we get closer to the end of the school year, the third affected by a pandemic, which is not inconsequential. Hi, Julia. So Julia, I see her in the squares. I'm going to turn it over to you, Julia, and Erica. Brian.
Okay, so Julia, I have enabled screen sharing if you would like to share your screen and get started.
Perfect.
And thank you for your flexibility.
No problem. Excuse my funny voice. I'm getting over a little sick, so I might have to mute at some point. You guys, I'm sure you'll understand. Thank you guys for having me here today. I just wanted to share a little bit about the winter assessment data that we collected with the board and take any questions about that. I know we had talked about the last board meeting that I presented at, coming back and sharing a couple different views of some of this data. And so I was able to collect additional data and can share that with you today. So our objectives for my portion of the presentation is that we're going to review our mid-year assessment results. Most of these assessments were given between January and March of this year. We are currently in the throes of our end of year assessment period. So we'll have that data, in a month or two as well. And so I'm going to share NWA data, which is what we've seen most frequently. I'm also going to share DIBBLES data, which is a new assessment that we implemented this year, and STAMP data, which is a target language assessment, which we implemented more broadly this year than we ever have before. And then I'll take some questions at the end. But feel free to interrupt as I go and ask questions for clarification or anything like that. The first thing I wanted to do was share a little bit about what Stokes is doing with this data, just so that we have that as a framework before we start looking at the numbers. We're continuing to support the whole child with social, emotional, physical wellness, and building children's enjoyment of music, art, and physical expression. So I just wanted to emphasize this because, our biggest push towards the beginning of this year, of course, was making sure that we're addressing any academic holes that we had seen coming out of the pandemic and distance learning time. But our biggest goal was making sure that students were happy, safe, and integrated back into our community. So I just wanted to ground this in that first. As well as that, the teachers, learning specialists, instructional coaches are collaborating to analyze and adjust instruction in the classroom. So they have weekly team meetings where they look at this data and plan interventions within the classroom using all of the tools and collaboration skills that we have developed. The student support teams are also providing interventions outside of the classroom to students identified in need of support. So if the board is interested, there's a link to a presentation that the student support team coordinators did, and that's there at that link when that button that says here. So if you'd like to know more about that, feel free to enjoy that recorded presentation. Additionally, we created and are piloting a formative language assessment. So what we discovered is we really needed additional measures to assess how our students were doing in the target language. We had been using mostly reading assessment data for our target language, and we created in-house an assessment that measures students' performance on the TOEFL learning standards, which we addressed. And so that's giving us a lot of really interesting information about our program and about how our students are doing. And I think there's going to be some really wonderful shifts and adjustments coming out of that assessment data. And those are things that we're all doing this year. Additionally, at the end of this year, we've been working really hard as an instructional leadership team to analyze this data and make strategic decisions about curriculum and assessment. So there are some shifts that we're having in our reading and writing assessment, as well as the ways that we're approaching target language assessment, as well as we're looking at all of those additional tools that we use for intervention times. And we're really analyzing them in a really thorough way and making some decisions about what we're changing for the next couple of school years. We also have continued access to federal funding to support ongoing interventions outside of school time. So we're planning for those, and we're really going to continue to support students in all times that they're available. I know that we've gone over this before, but I just wanted to give us a little reminder before we dig into our NWA data, what a percentile and what a quintile is. So a percentile is a value on a scale of 100 that indicates the percent of a distribution that's equal to or below it. So based on a bell curve, and so if I say somebody scored at the 66th percentile, they're scoring better than 66% of comparable students at that time. And so if we think about this in terms of, I know many of us have children, right? The height and weight things. I'm at the 10th percentile of height, so I'm only taller than 10% of people. That's what a percentile is. And so when we look at that, just to make sure that we're all on the same page. And then the other piece of this that I'm presenting is quintiles. I really think this is a helpful way to look at our NWA data because we get a better picture than just an average, because we get to see how many students fall into each of these categories. NWA divides their quintiles into, divides their percentiles into 5 quintiles. And so a child scoring below the 21st percentile is in that low category, which in my graphs look like this bright red color. Anybody's in the low average is the 21st to 40th, which looks like this orange color. Yellow is 41st to 60th, and high average is 61st, 80th, and above 80 is the high. And so that's what a typical quintile would look like. So if you see any of those colored bars that are above or below 20% each, that would mean that it indicates that either we're doing better than typical or worse than typical, depending on if it's more or less. I hope that's clear. I think you'll understand as we go on, but please interrupt me if you don't. The other thing I wanted to share with you was before we get started into the achievement data, was our median growth percentiles for NWA. And this is the amount of growth that students made between the fall of this school year and the winter testing period of the school year. And so overall, as an LEA, our math growth percentile was at 36 and median was at 36 and our reading was at 44. And so our goal for this growth percentile is at least the 50th percentile or above. So as you can see, we definitely have work to do here. And we've been looking at different reasons why this might be happening or not. But just to clarify, these typical growth percentiles were made in a norming study that was done in 2015 and then 2020 again. And so it's compared to pre-pandemic growth norms. So I'm not sure that I think that we're going to see as we move on and we are able to get access to data coming out of the pandemic, that those growth norms are maybe a little bit atypical than what's happening now.
Julia, I have a quick question. I'm assuming that other schools across the country are, but correct me if I'm wrong, is it a fair assumption to make that this is not unique to Stokes? I mean, particularly like comparing, pre-pandemic to pandemic. Is that a fair assumption to make?
Absolutely. I think, we're just sort of getting into the data cycles right now, and it's a little bit early for us to have, or for NWA as an organization, the assessment organization, to have more collected data about how kids are doing relative to pre-pandemic times. But I would say that that's definitely true. I think that everyone notes that growth and achievement are looking really different than they did pre-pandemic, and it's a little bit hard to predict what should be happening. And that's why we need to look at multiple measures of student achievement and student growth, because people have come into our classrooms this year in so many different places that I think typical is really hard to measure.
Okay, thank you. So this is our NWA Winter 2022. So this is our reading quintiles by grade level to give you guys a picture of how our grade levels are performing in terms of their achievement levels in reading during this winter term. Doesn't look terribly different than our fall term. Again, all of our grade levels are scoring above sort of what is considered typical. So again, if you remember, each of those bars in a typical quintile would have about 20%. All of our grade levels are scoring better than that. The high groups are all above 20%. And then if we look at in a typical group, that green bar would be at about 40%. So as you can see, all of our students are scoring, grade levels are scoring above that at this moment. Any questions so far on that one?
Julia, can you this is Hoyt, can you refresh my memory? What's the NWEA?
Oh, absolutely. Sorry, I should have. An NWA is an adaptive assessment that assesses sort of a big picture view of how students are doing on achieving skills in reading and math. And so what happens is students take the assessment and the assessment adapts to their level. So it'll get harder or easier based on how they answer those questions. And then it gives them a percentile relative to students nationally. And those national percentiles are based on studies that were done in 2020 and 2015.
So this chart reflects the growth that we just saw previously?
this chart reflects the achievement level that we saw. So when we go back to this growth score, right, our students aren't growing at the levels that we would hope them to be, but we can see that they're achieving more strongly than is it typical nationally.
And Jen, can you refresh my memory again? Is this profile where what our student, I think that's kind of like the standard profile for our student.
Absolutely.
So they perform above.
Yep.
National
We've
average.
typically scored above above national norms. Yep.
So pre-pandemic, the median growth would, if I got this right, pre-pandemic, the median growth would be probably higher.
Probably higher, yep. There
Yeah.
have been occasions that we haven't scored at the 50th percentile in growth, but pre-pandemic we had been scoring at the 50th percentile or above generally. And
as a result, would probably impact this chart that we're looking at, where the average and high would be a larger percentile than it is.
Yeah, exactly. Right. We're definitely achieving a little lower than we had been pre-pandemic, but still better than national norms, if that makes sense.
So the way this kind of comes across to me is, I'm sorry. Okay. Yeah. So the way this kind of comes across to me is that because our students perform typically over index to the national average, the slower growth rate did not impact impacted us less from an achievement standpoint.
Yep, I would say that it impacted us to some extent, but less
than it would, yeah, if we had performed closer to the national average or below the national average.
Yep,
okay.
Exactly.
So there's no, I guess where I'm going with this was that my ultimate question when I saw the growth was, and I'm sure this is something that we're all the DCPS is experiencing, and probably all schools nationwide, that, what's the long-term impact of growth and achievement on these students, and will they reach that COVID presented, and will they reach the target levels of reading, math, achievement that they're supposed to reach by the time they get out of 5th grade or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems that our story is not that story. Our story is we're still on a trajectory to probably exceed the levels of achievement. And
yes, I would say that that's true. I think the academic recovery though will take multiple years. So I would say that and I think you're going to see this more when we look at the math data. I would say that, there's students definitely need additional support, like to catch back up to what their potential would have been had there not been the pandemic occurring. Does that make sense?
That makes total sense. The potential is over indexed to the national average. That's why the school is as strong. That's a manifestation of the school being as strong as it is.
Yeah.
It's not a question of are the kids reaching their minimum objectives that they need to reach at their grade X or grade 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's a question of the kids reading the potential that the program is done for, and that potential means that they're that potential means that they're going to outperform the national average materially. Okay.
Yep. We wanted to take a look at the race and ethnicity reading quintiles as well. I know that this was an important topic for the board. So we do continue to have an achievement gap between our white students and our other racial subgroups. Our Asian subgroup is only 5 students, so I'm not sure that that's statistically significant. But you can see that we definitely have continue to have an achievement gap, although not as large as many as you'll see in the achievement gap nationally typically. And then as we looked at this last time, we asked to look at race and ethnicity with an academic disadvantage filter. And so I pulled our 3 largest race and ethnicity subgroups, and I pulled all students just to give us a sense of what this looks like. And the way that I identified economically disadvantaged students were any students who qualified for free or reduced lunch according to the National School Lunch Program. And so that includes students who are on government assistance, as well as students who are lower income who qualify for free and reduced lunch. Those numbers that you see there are the N sizes, and I just thought we should put those in there for reference. So if we start over here at the all students category, right, this is our total of all students in the quintiles in reading. And this is our economically disadvantaged students versus our not economically disadvantaged students. You can see that there's a pretty large gap between how our not economically disadvantaged students are comparing to our economically disadvantaged students. And I'll give you guys a moment to look at these broken up by race and ethnicity. So this is our Black, African American, our Hispanic, Latino, and our white students. We only have 5, just to note in terms of N size issues, we only have 5 students who are white in the tested group that qualify as economically disadvantaged. So this one may not be statistically reliable.
And in the other slide, there was there a category for multiracial or biracial as well?
Yep. Yep, exactly. I didn't include that one because it's when we split up students into smaller subgroups like that, we end up with very small numbers of students in those, and the not economically disadvantaged multiracial students were very, very small, even smaller than the white ones. But I thought I should include that because it was at least slightly larger. Yep.
I have 2 quick questions, and they're really like more speculative or what staff are doing with this kind of information. The one is, when you all see the gaps, what kinds of things, the race gaps or this SES, socioeconomic status gaps, what kinds of things are you doing or thinking about as interventions? And then the second question that's really, I could have asked earlier in the presentation, is what went into the decision to start using DIBELS?
Great question. So some of the things that we look at when we look at the SES and race ethnicity achievement gaps, we make sure first that we've been giving our teachers lots of training on ensuring that their approaches in the classroom are they approach teaching with an anti-bias framework. And so we've done several trainings this year on that issue, just to ensure that teachers' practice in the classroom is aligned with our values as a school. And so that's one piece that we look at. The other piece is that we make sure that when we look at student data individually, the student support team coordinators are really targeting those students with those needs. And a lot of times, but not always, of course, a lot of times those students fall into the category of low SES and things like that. And so we're making sure that we have targeted interventions within the classroom and outside of the classroom to address those needs. That DIBELS question is a great one. Does that answer your question in terms of the interventions and things like that we're doing?
Yes.
Okay. And the DIBELS question is a great one. Let me, can I hold that one until we get to the DIBELS data? I think my slide will help.
That seems fine.
And then Julia, really quickly, just in terms of, I'm trying to figure out like what the top line here is around achievement gap based on race and ethnicity. So, and again, like, I guess I feel like we have to preface with everything, like knowing that we're in this like pandemic space. But I'm just curious, like within the, 5 years, like do we see the achievement gap widening or narrowing? Like what type of trend have you seen?
That's a great question. I would say that pre-pandemic, we definitely were making a lot of progress on closing our achievement gap. Our African-American students, particularly, were scoring really significantly higher than students in Park, at least significantly higher than students across the city. And our, and so our achievement gap relative to the rest of the city was definitely decreasing. I would say that we have seen an increased achievement gap post-pandemic. And so I think that that's really unfortunate, but I think I think that you would probably see that. I think that all schools across the nation, or not all of them, but many schools across the nation have seen that as well. And so it's something that we're really putting a lot of focus on in the instructional leadership team at Stokes and within grade level team meetings, is making sure that we're really being conscious of practice and giving additional support.
Julie, is this achievement, that increased achievement gap, is that the achievement gap between our students, our Black students, and the national average of Black students, or our Black students and the other ethnicities in the school?
Our Black students and our white students, not relative to national norms. I don't think we have that data yet. Like, I think it's going to, once the park scores come out in August, I think we'll be able to compare citywide and more nationally. NWA hasn't yet published what this data looks like across the country in terms of achievement gaps nationally. But I think they haven't done any studies on that yet, but I'm sure that those are in the process. It's a little bit early yet, I think, to see what's happening with data on these assessments nationally.
I have a question. Assuming to the extent to which the distinction between economic and non-economic disadvantage is related to access to resources, do we have an understanding whether or not we can actually address those issues, but an understanding of what those differential access to resources looks like? What are the things? Is it tutoring? What are the things that the non-disadvantaged kids have access to then that the disadvantaged children don't have access to?
That's a great question. I'm not sure that I'm really fully qualified to answer that question. I think that you're right, that there is definitely tutoring. Like, our non-academically disadvantaged students definitely have access to tutoring. I think there are a lot of, I'm not sure if Ms. Moore or Ms. Bryant wants to hop in here and answer that question.
Julia, I am not qualified to answer it fully either, but just thinking about some of our more economically advantaged students have not just access to tutoring, but other resources, materials, opportunities for travel, interaction, practicing language. Many of them are involved in extracurricular activities, which impact, overall learning. There and things like some of our low-income students don't have access to, outside of our school building, meals. They're the basic life needs that some of the families just aren't able to provide at the same level, and that makes an impact on a child's ability to learn.
I'd also like to jump in and say that our basic programming, especially pre-pandemic, in our programming, we really sought to mitigate those factors. Evidence of that is all of the experiential community-based opportunities, community-based learning that we provide for children, all of the after-school enrichment and academic strengthening activities we have, the travel opportunities we have for children, not just to Martinique and Panama, but traveling within the mid-Atlantic, going to Virginia Beach and do whale watching, just as one example, going to take overnight trips to farms. So we have tried, we went into this understanding that there were different kinds of resources. We did not have a problem, frankly. We weren't presented with having disparity between racial groups for most of the years of the school. We did have some socioeconomic disparities, but they weren't based on race, and that is just simply because we didn't have that much racial differentiation. Much of what I think that much of what we have historically offered to students has not been available to them for the last 2 years. And I think, I don't do the numbers. Julia's a numbers expert, but I would imagine that has some impact on the differences that we're seeing now. We look forward to getting back to doing what we think we do well and what distinguishes us from other schools.
Thank you very much. That helped a lot. Thank you.
Mhm.
Question, did you track the data? This data is for both campuses?
It is, it's cross campus, yep.
Did you track it break by campus?
Yep.
Okay.
I didn't include all of those charts in here. And I had quite a few. I would say generally the achievement levels at East End are slightly lower than they are at Brookland still. And our East End campus also does have more economically disadvantaged students than our Brookland campus does.
Okay.
I can pull those together for you if you'd like to see them.
I think it'd be helpful because just my view, I think it's helpful in the sense to see what resources needed to be directed to each campus as we continue to evolve both schools.
Absolutely.
And Julia, just for a note, in the Hispanic Latino economic disadvantage category, especially, are many of those students, or do we track, is their first language actually Spanish or English?
Yep, many of our economically, I would say the vast majority of our economically disadvantaged Hispanic and Latino students are ELL, are English language learners.
Okay.
There may be one or two exceptions to that, but. And that's what, this is our subgroup data. This is our reading data by subgroup. So female, male at risk, which is a smaller subset of that economically disadvantaged population. It's students who qualify for government assistance, special education, and English language learners. Any questions here?
I'm sorry, Julie, can you go back to that previous slide, please? What does the NA represent again?
Students who were unable, we're having some attendance struggles and getting kids here in during testing windows due to COVID issues. And so the NA are students who didn't test
Gotcha.
during this time period. I thought it was important to include that just to have a sense of what that looks like. It's usually much smaller than that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It makes a difference on the margins.
Yeah.
Or I have a question. Were all these the testing, was it all done at school or did some get done at home?
All of this testing was done at school.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. This is our math data. Again, quintiles by grade level. You can see here that there are definitely grade levels in which we aren't meeting sort of a national norm goals. And I would say that our math data, more than our reading data, was really impacted by distance learning. And I would say that our teachers have this is not just, I would say that the area, one of the areas in which we've really been focusing this year is looking at math data and making sure that students are getting more individualized instruction. Our teachers confirm that where they saw the most academic difference coming in was with that math data. Our students came in really different places.
Did we switch math curriculums?
During distance
grade
learning,
levels?
during distance learning, we used Zern more. And that was because the approach, online tools for that math curriculum were much more functional than the ones with investigations. And so I would say that all of our teachers agree that they really prefer the developmental and conceptual based investigations curriculum compared to Zern. And we did come back to investigations as our main curriculum this school year. But I do think, students came in a lot of different places coming out of distance learning. And it's been a challenge for teachers to really meet everybody where they are. But we're doing a lot of data analysis of our formative assessments in math and making sure that teachers are really understanding where their kids are and how to support them. Additionally, we do have math intervention programs. At Brooklyn campus, we're using Dreambox, and at East End, we're using IXL. And we're taking a look at both of those programs and seeing which ones are effective for the groups that we're targeting. And we are really, and as a result of this data, we are actually implementing, we're searching right now for a math benchmark assessment outside of NWA. That's going to give us a really good sense of which specific grade level standards we need to be targeting more closely, which we'll implement 3 times a year next year.
I have a second grade son. He has IXL, did that during the pandemic and loved it. And his math scores are up. He's second grade.
Great.
This is probably a question for Erica, but I'm just curious. Are there any federal dollars that you're aware of that have become available to try to address some of these like catch-up issues that schools are experiencing coming out of pandemic for additional resources? I'm just curious.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Excuse me, there is an ESSER 3 grant. It is COVID related, targeted to supporting the return to in-person learning. And there is a 20% set aside for that particular grant that should be focused on use of evidence-based practices to increase, what is the term that they use? Accelerate learning. So that's been there have been 3 iterations of that particular grant in the last couple of years. And a portion of each one has been targeted toward that. There's also money that should become available at some point for, it's called HIT. Is it high intensity tutoring? Is that what HIT stands for? But that's a grant that we haven't accessed yet. When it is available, we will definitely apply for it.
Erica, do you know?
Okay, thanks.
Sorry. If the City Tutor program is accessible at all for Stokes students, does it apply to our grade levels?
I believe that it's accessible. We would have to engage and pay for those services.
I think some of this is already being done through the is it the equity I'm not going to name the group, but the school team, the equity team. Thank you, the equity team. But I mean, I appreciate the the need for. I mean, given some of this data that Julia is sharing, like I appreciate the need for things like tutoring, right? But like Erica, to your point earlier, to the question that you answered, I think that Dr. Smith asked is. There's so many other factors, and I'm wondering whether or not, like, as a part of the equity team, for example, like, is there any, any thoughts, or is this already happening, of like partnering parents or families who have maybe, more access to things, more exposure, maybe some more flexibility with families of students who may be economically disadvantaged to, even just as a way to try to help connect the community, but also as a way of families who have the flexibility, the access with families that may not, to maybe try to, as another way to try to address this, as in addition to tutoring or additional academic support. Sorry, that was a really long-winded question, but hopefully you get what I'm saying.
I do know that the equity team is working on partnering
Yeah.
families for tutoring purposes. I'm not sure what the status of that program is right now, but I do know that that's something that the equity team is working on.
Okay. Thank you.
And we'll just, can I get a time check? What's our? How fast do I need to go through the rest of this presentation?
We
to
should
respect
probably be
everybody's time?
wrapping it up, but we
Okay.
have some time.
In terms of, this is that same graph, and you guys have this in your board materials, so I'll just show it briefly. It shows similar achievement gaps, but maybe even a little bit more extreme than the reading achievement gaps in terms of economically disadvantaged versus not. And this is our subgroup data for math. Again, just kind of generally lower across the board.
Julia, could you go back one slide, please?
Sure.
Yeah, this is pretty dramatic. What how would you say, from your recollection, are you seeing a significant difference? What's the gap that you're seeing pre-COVID versus?
Yeah, again, similarly, the achievement gap between economically disadvantaged and non-academically disadvantaged students has increased post-pandemic.
Are we magnitude of it's doubled, it's 75%, it's 25%, or?
A great question. I don't know that I have that. I could make an estimate based on just my understanding. I'm not sure that I have those numbers right on the top of my head, but I would guess that it's at least another 50% more extreme.
Okay, that's material.
Yeah.
That's a material range.
Yeah. And I'm happy to pull those numbers together if it would be useful for the board.
Is that because I'm curious, is that because the a decrease in the ratings of the Black students, an increase in the rating of the rating of the white students, or a combination of both? Or
a combination of both.
Yeah,
some of our students, particularly students from privileged backgrounds, who were really able to afford,
academic support
during the pandemic, actually increased their achievement.
That was my next question, actually. Yeah.
Yep.
The increases in that.
Some folks were able to hire, one-to-one or one-to-small group tutors that supported them during their learning. And, that's a lot more individualized attention that you typically get in a classroom.
Yeah. Okay.
So I just think that informs where we need to go from here in the future, assuming that our students will be able to show up at school, and that we will be able to we will be able to teach them in ways that are most effective for them.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Also, correct me if I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ms. Moore. Go ahead.
No, go on.
I mean, the COVID pandemic has certainly impacted what can happen within any school community. But I think at one point, didn't we have college students maybe coming in and doing some tutoring with kids after school? Or maybe that was discussed, and I don't know whether it is now, but with COVID, that's not an easy thing to do. And we still don't know what's going to happen. But given my business of what I do, I mean, having that one-on-one is invaluable. I mean, it makes a tremendous difference for kids of any economic background, and how you do that within the context of Stokes is both a challenge and an opportunity, but I think it is something to think about as we go forward.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And I'm happy to share. Oh, so sorry, Linda.
just really quickly, I want to just remind everybody that for more than half of the academic year, well, for all of the academic year, our students have been pretty much within their classroom pods. So that minimized the opportunity for lots of the things that we would normally do with them. So, my plea is for everybody to keep as much social distance now and wear your mask so that we can get back to something like business as usual when school starts this fall. Because otherwise, these problems are going to continue to grow.
That is exactly right, Ms. Moore. I agree.
And I'm sorry, Tracy.
No worries, Ms. Moore. I did free tutoring throughout the pandemic from very early on, mostly with new arrivals who are coming over the southern border and new refugees. And while a lot of my colleagues did virtual tutoring, we found that going in person and sitting outside, we were much more effective than the virtual tutoring. So I do think that the pandemic has really created vast differences among all of the students. And there are lots of programs out there, Julie, and I'm happy to sit and talk with you about it because I've worked with so many of them and I still do. I have about 19 students with whom I work tutoring. And one of the largest issues that I found, especially with the ESOL students, was many of them have learning differences and they just had not been spotted throughout the pandemic. And so I had to fight hard to get them IEPs over the last year. And I don't know if we're doing a lot of testing to determine whether or not, because everyone's just been so overwhelmed with all of the other challenges that a lot of these kids have gone unnoticed for 2 years and don't have the supports in place.
Yeah, I had that question too, as we've been looking at this data. Where do the kids with learning challenges fall into this? Because it also comes into play, but it may not be so it could be skewed a bit because kids that maybe have IEPs or accommodations, that could be additional risk rather than just socioeconomic.
Yep, we have had record numbers of students, like it's to be expected, of course, but record numbers of students that are in the range of about 50 students referred to our student support team process this year, which is, the steps that we take before we evaluate students for learning differences. And so, across the city, that's true. And there's an enormous backlog of psychologists' availability for evaluations and things like that. But you are absolutely right that there's a lot of students whose needs were not addressed or not, that weren't getting the kind of evaluations that they may have gotten had we been in the building during the pandemic. So we're definitely playing catch up on that.
And one last question as it relates to that, because what I found in Montgomery County Public Schools is that the parent or someone like myself has to sort of initiate that process and has to write, there's all these protocols and laws in place and regulations, which is a very complex and nuanced process. And so a lot of the newcomers and the children who are refugee children, their families obviously didn't know that process. Are we as a school sort of trying to flag these kids and then help the parents and families through the process?
Absolutely. So we have weekly team meetings in which teachers and the students, the grade level teams and their student support team coordinators
get together and they identify students who are of concern for various reasons, whether it's academics or emotional issues. They try interventions in the classroom first. And if those are found to be ineffective for supporting the students' growth, then they refer them to that student support team process, which I was just referring to. So we've put record numbers of students in that process this year. So it's definitely, parents can definitely instigate that. And I think we have a lot of parents doing that as well, but we also have, our staff is tracking that really closely.
Julia, quick question, two questions. One, that the at-risk and the SPED distribution look incredibly similar.
Mm-hmm.
Is there overlap there?
There is overlap there. Our at-risk population, like the tested population that's at risk, is a pretty small in size. Not all, like about half of our at-risk students are also special education.
Okay.
So very similar, but not entirely overlapping. Then there's a lot of special education. We have a lot more special education students than we do at-risk students, and so.
Okay.
Many of the students in the at-risk bucket are also special education, but there are a lot of students in the SPED bucket that are not at risk.
Okay, got it.
Do the IEP kids fall in underneath the special ed category?
Exactly. Yep.
Gotcha.
And how do we
That could be
define?
wide-ranging.
Oh, sorry.
No, I'm sorry. I'm good. I'm sorry.
No, how do we define at risk?
Yeah, that's a city category. And what it means for our purposes, it's a little bit bigger as you get into older grades, but for our purposes, it's the students who qualify for government assistance, government financial assistance. So those students who are on SNAP or TANF. Okay. Homeless is another category that we have a couple of students who fall into that category for the at-risk.
So in Maryland, throughout the pandemic, you didn't have to file paperwork to be as part of the FARMS, the free and reduced meals program. And so we lost a lot of kids, and everyone received meals, so it wasn't an issue. In DC, did they still have to qualify and prove that they qualified, and how is it going moving forward? Because what we're finding is that moving forward, Maryland's obviously requiring everyone sign up, because if they don't, they won't receive the free meals, and then the schools might not qualify either for additional assistance. How's it working for our school?
I can't speak generally. I know that there's a couple of different categories for DC schools, depending on what percentage you have of students with free and reduced lunches. But at Stokes School, we definitely collected those free and reduced lunch forms and input them into the data. However, you're right that, or it's the case here as well, that all students qualified for free lunch this year. There's additional federal funding for that. So we collected the data and submitted it, but I don't think it's being used for actually determining lunch fees at Stokes, because there's federal funding. Yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
So
I just want to make sure that we have the data then correct as far as who's at risk and who's economically disadvantaged. That's all.
Yep.
I was just going to add to that our low income numbers or farm numbers that are being used are based on pre-pandemic numbers, and I think we hovered around 40% or so of our population that qualified. Am I right, Julia?
Yep.
Just under. But moving forward, we are not sure that we will meet that threshold because our numbers are decreasing, just as the demographics in the District of Columbia are changing.
Yeah. I need to step in and just give a time check because I think we only have 15 more minutes and I want to make sure that we get to the executive director report. Julia, can you do a sort of wrap up and then we can do a cascade of questions if there are remaining questions that you can get back to us.
Absolutely. I just wanted to address this slide quickly because of your question, Heather. Dibbles is a new assessment we gave this year. The reason we did it, we really wanted to figure out for our struggling readers, which areas they really needed support in and where we could adjust our curriculum to address those needs. And it's been really informative and useful. This is the general data. About 50% of our students LEA-wide, our meeting benchmark, about 50% are not on this score. And it aligns really well with that NWA data in terms of kids who are scoring well on that or score well on this one. It gives us a lot more sort of fine-grained information about what kinds of support we need school-wide as a curriculum, and then also student-based. And then STAMP is a target language assessment. We did it kindergarten through 5th grade, different categories for each one. Like typically reading and listening were a little bit better, which are the, and then the writing and speaking were a little bit more challenging for students. This is school-wide. We had a wide range in each of the grade levels and classes. So the goal for the end of 5th grade would be like a level 4 or 5, depending on the domain. So you can see that we already have a big chunk of kids who are meeting those goals. And again, this is kindergarten through 5th grade. Happy to share more information about target language at some point. We do think it's very important because it's part of our mission. Questions?
One thing for trustees who may not be aware, there's been a lot of national debate around reading and literacy and approaches to teaching reading. And I, for one, am encouraged to see this DIBELS information and the focus on phonemic awareness in the staff. I think it'll be essential for catching kids up, particularly in those grades, our grade levels, where kids are learning to read, given the interruptions in instruction and the challenges of distance learning. So I was excited to see that. Are there other questions? Or actually, I'm going to ask trustees to put questions in the chat. And that way we can capture them. And maybe we make some room on our next board meeting to have a little bit more dive into some of this academic information. And in fact, some of it will be completed. So there might be another thing. So we should make that a note for the next agenda. And I'm going to turn it over to Erica. Thank you very much, Julia, for the report.
Thank you all very much for your time.
Thank you, trustees, for really deeply engaging, because I think this is the core of our work, how our scholars are doing. Go ahead, Erica.
Thanks, Heather. Thanks again, Julia. Julia is one of very few people I know who's able to take data and explain it, break it down and explain it in a way that you can anybody can process it. So thank you for that. And thank you also, Julia, for you're a trooper. Thanks for coming today. She wasn't feeling too well. Have a good afternoon, rest of your day. All right. I am going to try to be as swift as I possibly can with my presentation. Is everyone able to see my screen? All righty. So today, and as always, this school year and last school year, we're going to give an update on the state of COVID and the school's response to COVID within the community. I have a couple of things that I've already shared with the board via email, but wanted to highlight a couple of awards that we have received and acknowledgements in the last month too. And then wanted to turn to some an overview of our strategic plan. We haven't really been able to talk about that much in the last couple of years, but we're midway in the plan right now. So I wanted to give you an update of where we are in kind of our progress in our tracking of our goals and progress toward meeting our goals, and also to think about things that are coming in the future, because I think it's important for us to, even though we're still grounded in trying to manage in-person school during COVID, I think it's important to look toward the future and look toward some of the goals that we had established for ourselves prior to COVID. So we are actually right now, this week, appear to be in a COVID surge. We have, let me rewind. If you recall the last board meeting, I shared that We were planning to kind of relax some of our protocols, that rather than testing 100% of staff and students, we were reducing to 20%. We were allowing our students and staff to go maskless outside. We still have an indoor masking mandate. Some of our students and staff have begun to do things like take field trips again, which we did not previously last year or for the first part of this year. So we have been relaxing our protocols. This week, we have positive cases, multiple positive cases on both campuses of COVID. We're not the only school to experience it. I'm aware of schools that actually have significantly more than we do. But in one of our classes at the Easton campus, both teachers tested positive, as well as students. And so we had to quarantine that class for 5 days. They should be returning next Tuesday to class. So this is not over, unfortunately, but we continue to march on. We have had a lot of conversation within the community about whether or not to mask indoors. There is a contingent of families who would like for us to relax that particular requirement. But as recently as this week, we have results from a survey that we conducted with the community, and it still appears as if the majority, 63+% of our families still want to keep that indoor masking. I think it's especially important now since we're obviously in the middle of a surge to keep that in place to keep our scholars safe. And just for informational purposes, it appears that DC government has quietly reinstated some masking requirements in certain DC government buildings through, I believe, June. Within our school to kind of respond to this most current surge, next week, we are going to increase our testing of both students and staff for COVID. Rather than 20%, we will test 100% of staff and test 50% of students so that we can hopefully catch any cases before we have a major outbreak within our schools. Any questions about that? Okay. All right. So I shared with the board maybe last week or the week before that we had received formal notice from the Middle States Association that on April 7th, our accreditation was renewed. Basically, it means that the accreditation renewal process affirmed that Stokes School meets all the standards for accreditation, that we're adhering to Middle States policies and procedures, and that we met all of the requirements of the self-study that we used, the protocol that we used to go through this last accreditation process. We will be accredited for a 7-year term. The current accreditation ends on July 1st, 2029. In that same meeting at Middle States on the 7th of April, we also were awarded their Early Childhood Education Program of Distinction. It appears that we were the only school that received that particular distinction during this period. But basically what it attests to is that Stokes School's Early Childhood Education Program offers high quality early care. We have a well-articulated child-centered philosophy within our ECE activities, and that we use evidence-based best practices throughout the program, and the program is effective for all of the children who are enrolled in the program, including those with special needs. This particular award was something that was not initially in our planning, but we decided that we likely met all of the requirements and that we would go for it. And so it's an extra feather in our cap.
Well done. Well done.
Thank you. To many people's surprise, there is another award that was granted, I guess, within the last month to our executive director, moi-même, by the French government. I was named Chevalier, which is Knight, of the Ordre des Palmes Académiques. It's a French order created back in 1808 that recognizes scholars and journalists and cultural activists for their contributions to the French the French culture and helping to disseminate the French language. So this is an award that I was surprised to receive. I believe that the association with this order and some of the other kind of networks that this order gives access to will help to strengthen our French program, French immersion program at Stokes. It will expand our network, give us access to some scholarship and scholarship information for students. And again, just another feather in our cap. So we were very proud of that. Okay, any questions about the awards or accreditations? All right. So I wanted to get to our strategic plan. Again, it's a plan for the period of 2019 through 2024. It was developed with input from board members and school leadership, staff, students, families, and many of our community partners. It's a very ambitious plan that is comprehensive and supports our school's mission and vision and priorities. And it also was designed to build on previous successes of the school. So just as a reminder, the 5 pillars of this plan are: 1, to sustain and improve our scholars' academic, social wellness, and social justice outcomes; 2, to strengthen our internal systems and processes; 3, to expand, strengthen, and sustain our resources, meaning human, social, and financial resources; 4, to increase the number of students and families that our school serves; and 5, to enhance our position as an advocate and thought leader in urban education. So to track our progress with this plan, we actually have something that's called a strategic action planning guide. Sorry, was there a question? No. Okay. The planning guide includes goal statements, outcome measures, progress indicators, timelines, and people responsible for different activities. We conduct quarterly reviews of this plan, of our progress by department. So instructional team will meet to discuss and track progress toward goals. So will student support. So will finance and operations, and so on and so forth. So this is, we within the last probably year and a half, we've been very intentional about setting these quarterly reviews, even during the pandemic. Last month, the network leadership team got together in early to do a comprehensive kind of mid-plan review. It allowed us some time for targeted reflection and brainstorming, to think a little deeper about the planning between now and the start of school year 22-23. And this was also the first time since the beginning of the pandemic that this particular team of school leaders, this is our network team of school leaders, was able to meet in person since the beginning of the pandemic. So during this meeting, we reviewed accomplishments. We identified outstanding actions that needed to be taken in regards to the strategic plan. We looked at kind of our organizational structure and any needed changes that we should make to ensure successful expansion of the existing programs, as well as the potential middle and high school. And it was an opportunity for us to affirm the successes of the work that we've accomplished to date. Again, despite everything else that's been going on, we have made significant progress along this plan, and also an opportunity for us to identify areas that needed some further attention that we have not been able to address in the plan, and how to kind of plan out our scope of work and action in response to that. So I just want to share with you progress that we've made under each pillar to date. This first pillar, again, sustaining and improving our scholars' academic, social, and wellness and social justice outcomes. We have, as I just mentioned, we renewed our MSA accreditation and received the Early Childhood Education Program of Distinction Award. We have attained our IB authorization. Within the IB program and programs of inquiry that classes focus on areas of study throughout the school year, across all of the content areas and grade levels, at least one of our program of inquiry units per year includes some kind of social justice action. We are very intentionally promoting language diversity and inclusion throughout not just our classroom, but among our staff and within our community and families. We, out of necessity, have improved the use of technology to support our instruction. We are now restoring and improving our school gardens. We continue to have very high percentages of family engagement. Over 80% of our families are engaging in home visits, and more than 85% of our families participate in parent-teacher conferences. Any questions on that? We'll go to the next pillar, which is to strengthen internal systems and processes. Julia talked some about this in her presentation, but our directors of teaching and learning and our instructional leadership teams have instituted something that they call learning walks to gather information about instructional practices and student learning. This is across campuses, and they've conducted multiple within the school year. Julia talked about the systems that have been put in place, the data analyses and the individual student reviews. We have remote teaching available, teaching and learning available across campuses now, with the use of a technology that we purchased for COVID to allow us to pivot easily from in-person to remote learning. And we've also found ways to use that technology even if we are in the classroom. For example, even if we are on campus, if we're not learning remotely, we still use the technology, for example, with our morning lineups. Historically, pre-pandemic, we had morning lineups with the whole school in one room. We would make announcements, sing our school song, have some presentations. We can't do that now because we can't gather as a whole group, but we use this OWL technology that enables us to come together every morning and do kind of replicate that morning lineup virtually, even though we're in the school buildings. Clearly, we had to expand our and strengthen our IT systems, so we have increased connectivity and bandwidth within the school buildings. We have one-on-one device ratio for all of our students. We have engaged with a new technology support company that's on campus at least twice a week, and they provide us with 24/7 technical support. We've also, in terms of strengthening our internal systems and process, we've assessed and looking at needs of our facilities improvement at the Brooklyn campus, because we have talked about that for quite some time. It is something that facilities improvements at the Brooklyn campus are needed because of the cramped space, and we have taken the step to acquire some architectural drawings that can give us ideas of how we can build out if we choose to do that in the future. We've also invested in, and we're using a new student information system called Power School, a new parent communication platform called Parent Square, and new onboarding and HR systems. Questions? Okay, under the pillar of expanding, strengthening, and sustaining our resources, we are actively working on succession planning within the school leadership. Last week, I believe during the Staff Appreciation Week, our communications guru had a social media push on staff that have been with the school for over 15 years, and there are 10 or 15 of us. So we acknowledge that there are measures that we need to be working on right now to ensure that in the time, inevitably, that some of us will start to cycle out of the school, that we have leaders in place and prepared to take over. We have been mapping out career pathways and options for different departments within the school, both administration and academic, as well as student support. We are finding ways to push in support for employees for their professional development goals. We continue this strong teacher pipeline that we've established from relationships with Howard University and Catholic University. We have, over the course of the last 2 or 3 years, really strengthened our instructional coaching system, which pushes in an additional layer of support to our classroom teachers to help refine their practice. We are, partially because of technology capabilities, we have really strengthened our cross-campus collaboration, and we're able to meet cross campuses on team levels and as a whole school. And we're also continuing to build and expand our community partnerships. That our partnerships at Stokes School have been one of the ways that we have been able to offer as many options as we have to students and families, and extracurricular activities. But we, for example, have expanded our partnership with Martha's Table at our East End campus, where we are participating in their Joyful Market program. The Alliance Française is offering scholarships to our students for summer school study. We have, I've recently joined the board of the DC Language Immersion Project, so trying to tap into resources that can support our immersion program. We have people within our East End campus who are actively participating in the Ward 7 Education Council. And I mentioned earlier about the fact that we are rebuilding our school gardens. Ms. Moore is actually taking leadership in that particular area. And we have rekindled our relationship with Washington Youth Garden, and also started a new relationship partnership with an organization called Food Corps. Under the pillar of increasing the number of students and families served by the school, we are still in a period of growth right now. Because of our East End campus that we opened in 2018, we'll continue to add classrooms at that campus next year, adding a 4th grade, the following year adding a 5th grade, where we will be at full growth. Once the charter amendment is submitted and approved to expand to middle high school, we can have projected growth through school year 30-31. When probably most of us will not be at that point associated with Stokes School Board. We will always be associated with Stokes School Board and staff, but probably not working or serving on the board in 30-31, but who knows. Another way that we are looking at increasing serving the number of students and families in the district is by exploring childcare options. And that's something that is an idea that has been floating around for a couple of years, but it is, there are other higher priority expansion goals right now. The last pillar, enhancing our position as an advocate and thought leader in urban education. This is where we've made the least amount of progress. Mostly due to pandemic related reasons, where we would measure the growth toward this goal by looking at media hits, the number of media hits that we have, the number of speaking engagements that staff or leadership would be involved in, the number of outside potential funders or supporters that come in for site visits, or the number of consulting contracts that the school could possibly have with other schools or other public education focused organization. So the major work left to be completed in the remaining years of the strategic goal as we see them, really intentionally focus on enhancing our position as advocate and thought leader, continuing to elevate and demonstrate our commitment to social justice. We have, in the last year and a half, 2 years, we have really tried, as I mentioned earlier, to find opportunities to integrate social justice into not just the classroom, but for example, we have social justice moments during morning lineup. We work with equity groups, which are parent groups that focus on social justice issues. But we want to find other ways to continue to elevate that, because that is at the core of who we are as Stokes School. And we want to be sure that anyone who is thinking about sending their children to Stokes or interested in the school in any way understands that that is a major tenet in our mission and philosophy. We'd like to identify some tools to measure student and staff health and wellness, especially as we continue to recover from the pandemic. This is an area of focus for us. It's been really important for us to be able to support wellness of our general community. And we want to be able to measure that support. We'd like to refocus efforts on compensation packages for staff. We need to develop a strategic communications plan. As we continue to grow, we understand the importance of developing some decision-making frameworks. We are in the middle of putting together a comprehensive development plan. We are planning to open a middle and high school and establish a Stokes School Freedom Farm. So that's a lot of work in the next couple of years. It's very ambitious, But we do believe that we can, it is attainable. Any questions? No questions. Okay.
There's a lot of
So
work.
it is a lot. It's a lot of work. Is it a lot? It is. I think that one of the things that we shared in the network team meeting where we delved into the strategic planning, one of the things that we shared was that we're really excited about looking at something other than COVID, right? We're excited about getting back to the goals that we established for ourselves. We're excited about new work. So it is a lot of work, but I think there's energy behind, not I think, I know that there's energy behind it. And so we're looking forward to accomplishing as much as we can.
Erica, quick question. I just wanted to clarify. A lot of organizations begin to stress emphasis on staff and student health and wellness. I want to make sure there's an equivalent concern or equivalent commitment to both financial and mental health in that concern also.
I love that question. We have been focusing mostly on physical, mental well-being. We have had partners, and we have a good partnership with our main bank. And in the past, we've offered financial wellness sessions. We also, for our incoming staff, talk about financial wellness in terms of planning for the future and that type of thing. But it's certainly an area where we can continue to expand to support families and staff in their financial well-being. Thank you for the question. So in terms of upcoming events, next Friday, and again, board members are always invited to events at Stokes. For the last couple of years, we've done things mainly virtually. We are trying to get back to in-person events, and we are going to have an in-person event on May 20th. This is in commemoration of our Mr. PC Islar, who was our building engineer and passed away at the, oh goodness, 2 years ago. He was for those who are new to the Stokes School Board, he was a rock within our community. He was the first person who would show up at school and often one of the last people to shut down the school in the evening. He loved Stokes School. He called Stokes his second wife, actually, I'm not sure how. But in his honor, we will have a tree planting ceremony next Friday at 9 a.m. at the Brooklyn campus. You are all invited to participate. On the 17th of June, we have our 5th grade graduation ceremony planned at the Brooklyn campus. This should be starting at 9 o'clock in the morning. It will be an outdoor event. We are limiting the number of participants because our students have to invite their families. But if anyone is interested in coming to the graduation ceremony on the 17th, please let me know. We also have our kindergarten stepping up days planned on June the 22nd. The Brooklyn Stepping Up Day will be at 9 o'clock in the morning, and the East End Stepping Up program will be at 1 o'clock in the afternoon.
Again, could you explain that?
Stepping up.
Mm-hmm.
Our kindergartners step up from kindergarten to 1st grade because they have become big kids. They will no longer have nap time. It's a transition and an acknowledgement of a transition from being really a little kid going into big kid school. During the Stepping Up Day ceremony, we sing songs. Miss Moore typically reads a poem entitled Everything I Learned, Everything I Know I Learned in Kindergarten. We, in the past, have had food and fellowship for Stepping Up Day, but because of COVID restrictions, we're not going to do that this year, but it is a way to celebrate a rite of passage for our kindergartners moving from being little kids to big kids. And then on September 10th, which is the first regularly scheduled board meeting during the school year, we will have a board retreat from 9:30 a.m. until 1:30 p.m. As we are planning, as of right now, to have this be an in-person retreat, when this meeting is over, I will send out a meeting invitation to everyone to place this date and time on their calendars. But when I sent out a doodle survey a few weeks ago to ask about people's availability for a board retreat, this date, September 10th, was the date that the majority of people who responded preferred. This will be an opportunity, obviously, for us to fellowship in person for the first time in over 2.5 years, but to work with, we should have an outside facilitator to work on some governance issues, probably some team building issues. The agenda has yet to be fixed, but as soon as it is, we will share that as well. And that is the end of my presentation. Any questions? Okay. Thank you very much.
Going twice. 3 times you're out. Thank you, Erica, for a really comprehensive report. I chimed in and said the school and the school community has been really busy, and it really has. And despite the fact that I think the city and maybe the whole nation is going through a surge, and so we're back on the top of this, focused on COVID, it's nice to know that the quality programmatic elements continue to garner praise and notice and appreciation for the school, and that we're continuing to move through our strategic goals. So that's really amazing. Any other new business or items on the agenda that, or things on that weren't on the agenda that folks want to raise at this time, because we are at time and need to close the meeting out?
Heather, I would just like to thank you again for your service as board chair. And I feel like I have some very large shoes to fill in a very good way.
Awesome.
For the school as well as you have during your tenure. And I'd like to thank Robin for being a trusted board member as well as her tenure. And I feel some kind of way by losing these folks. But I have a lot of confidence in the folks that are here and working to carry the school forward. And I think we all saw there's a lot of good, intense work coming up. And sometimes I've been accused of stating the obvious, but I definitely feel like the school is at an inflection point. They were at an inflection point when they went into COVID, and they're at an inflection point when they're coming out of COVID. And I think that the work that we as board members can do to support the school as they're at that inflection point will really help set the course for them to be successful over the next 5-10 years. And Janice is gone, but I really wanted to thank her for learning from her, and I think she was definitely left a positive impression on me as well.
Thank you for that, Hoy. And I'll just say it's been an honor and a privilege to chair this board. I'm excited to pass the gavel to Hoyt next month. It's going to be really exciting, but also continue to serve. So I wish you all, we don't have to vote to close the meeting out, right? Oh, I forget that every time. I think we can just adjourn. So I'm going to go with that in the spirit of keeping everybody, giving them back their, I hope you're all in beautiful sunny places on this Saturday. And thank you for your time and attention. It's not beautiful and sunny in DC. I've given it away. I'm not in DC.
No, it is not.
Well, enjoy the Saturday. I'm going to adjourn the meeting. And thank you all for your time and attention.
Heather, one more thing. I'm sorry. I would be remiss if I didn't thank Amy and Tracy as well for the heavy lift they did and pushing the slate forward and making sure that we could all have a seamless transition as well.
Absolutely.
Thank you all. Good afternoon.
Take care.
Thank you. Thank